On this day, in 1887, a large procession took place through the streets of Brisbane. However, unlike many of the civic parades that had taken place before it, few Brisbane residents turned out to cheer and wave. During the early 1870s, much of Brisbane's night soil, or the contents collected from the Dunny cans of Brisbane, was deposited on a hillside in Yorks Hollow, which became Victoria Park and in turn the inner city bypass. By spreading the waste across the hillside, it was hoped the manure would rapidly dry and break down once directly exposed to Queensland sun's rays. Whilst great in theory, the practice did not factor in the numerous storms Brisbane receives, especially during the summer months. Thus, after the contents of Brisbane's night cans were emptied onto the incline, rainwater washed the filth downhill into a nearby creek, which, in its course, fed the putrid mixture directly through the middle of Fortitude Valley. So, come late 1874, an area of 25 acres was gazetted by the government and Brisbane's manure depot was repositioned to a grassy flat at Kelvin Grove, on the bend of Enoggera Creek, or Kelvin Grove Creek in those days. By 1875, the operation at the site had become quite substantial, with a massive manure drying kiln in full swing and associated stables and outbuildings having been constructed. The site continued to successfully process Brisbane's night soil into the 1880s. However, as the population began to grow in Kelvin Grove, residents began to complain about the plant. By 1883, nearby residents were beginning to petition the council and the Central Board of Health over the now unwanted manure depot in their neighbourhood. Concerns increased as cases of typhoid were identified in the area, and many attributed the local rise in mysterious fevers to the pollution emanating from the manure depot. Furthermore, residents could no longer swim and bathe in the once pristine Enoggera Creek, which had now become a filthy cesspool, not only due to the runoff from the manure depot, but also due to unscrupulous dumping of Dunny can contents straight into the water. By early 1887, the situation had reached absolute breaking point, with the overpowering stench proving too much for many of the surrounding inhabitants. On the 7th of April 1887, a contingent of influential local residents made an application to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in order to have the Kelvin Grove manure depot closed down. After years of debate between the residents of Kelvin Grove and the Municipal Council, 16 affidavits were tendered and an interim injunction was issued by the court against the Mayor and the Corporation of Brisbane, successfully banning any further dumping of night soil on the site. The interim injunction was geared to become permanent a week later on the 14th of April. As a result of the injunction coming into full force on the 14th of April, the Corporation of Brisbane was left with no other option but to retrench the majority of nightmen, or the Dunny can collectors, who had worked at the Kelvin Grove manure depot. So, in order to bring their plight to the residents of Brisbane, the nightmen paraded through the city's streets, complete with Dunny carts. Needless to say, their procession failed to either reverse the Supreme Court's decision or gain the support of the greater Brisbane public. In the months that followed, alternate measures were put in place for the collection and disposal of Brisbane's waste. Of interest, the Kelvin Grove manure depot, beneath which 12 years of Brisbane's toilet waste was buried, was eventually converted into parkland for recreational use. 80 years later, the site would finally evolve into Ballymore, now considered the home of Queensland's rugby union.